Before she was ever a pop icon, before the glitz and Grammys, Cher was simply a little girl, caught in the chaos of a home that never quite held together. Her story didn't begin on a red carpet, but in a modest corner of California, where her parents, Georgia Holt and John Sarkeesian, met as young dreamers with little more than charm and chance on their side. Georgia was working at a donut shop in Fresno, while John, a strikingly handsome Armenian-American truck driver, swept her off her feet in a whirlwind romance. They married quickly in Nevada, hopeful but unprepared for what life would demand. Within just months, that hope began to unravel. Georgia, still so young herself, realized that marriage wasn't what she imagined. And before their daughter Cher even celebrated her first birthday, the marriage ended. At just 10 months old, Cher experienced her first major loss, the absence of her father. Though she would go on to hold a quiet pride in her Armenian roots, passed down from John, she grew up with little direct connection to him. Instead, her life would be shaped by the instability that followed. Georgia, trying to build a better life, remarried multiple times. 7 in total, including 2 more attempts with Cher's father. These transitions meant that Cher's childhood home was never consistent. New homes, new men, new names to remember. And with each new chapter, the feeling of safety and permanence slipped further away. One of the most influential figures in her early years was actor John Southall, Georgia's third husband. He brought some semblance of stability during Cher's most formative years, but even that marriage dissolved by the time Cher was 9. What followed was a string of moves, both physical and emotional. Her mother pursued a career in music and acting, often chasing roles that led nowhere. This meant income was scarce, and for a time, so was a roof over their heads. At just 2 years old, Cher was placed in a Catholic orphanage temporarily, while her mother struggled to find work and secure stable housing. Weeks passed, then more moves. At times, Cher and her half-sister were sent to live with grandparents, bouncing back and forth depending on whether Georgia had landed a job or lost one. This constant shifting had a deep psychological impact. Cher later recalled in interviews how she grew up with a gnawing sense of shame over her worn-out clothes, over shoes held together with rubber bands, over never quite fitting in. She once said she'd be scolded for damaging her shoes, even though they were already falling apart. She learned early on that survival often meant pretending, smiling through struggle, and learning to stand tall in shoes that barely held together. But more than anything, what those years taught her was how to be resilient, how to dream, even when the world told her she was too poor, too different, too out of place. She watched her mother reinvent herself again and again, and even in the midst of poverty and disappointment, there was this flicker of defiance, a refusal to give up, to accept defeat. Cher carried that same flicker inside her, and while her childhood was defined by instability, it quietly laid the foundation for the woman she would become: fierce, independent, and unbreakable. By the time Cher was just 16, the world around her felt unstable, but inside, her dreams were rock solid. She didn't know how or when, but she knew she was meant to be seen, to be heard. So, with the kind of courage that only comes from having nothing to lose, she left school and moved to Los Angeles. That's where fate stepped in the form of a man named Sonny Bono. Sonny was 11 years older than her, already working behind the scenes in the music industry as an assistant to the legendary Phil Spector. When they first met, there were no fireworks. Just a connection built on mutual need. Cher needed a place to stay. Sonny offered his apartment. She became his housekeeper, then his roommate, then his friend. But slowly, something deeper began to form between them, both musically and emotionally. Their bond wasn't just about romance, it was creative magic. They understood each other in a way that went beyond words. Cher, with her haunting contralto voice, and Sonny with his ear for arrangement, were a perfect storm. In 1965, that storm hit the airwaves in the form of I Got You Babe, a song that would become the anthem of a generation. Overnight, they were no longer just Sonny and Cher. They were Sonny and Cher, the couple who sang about love, unity, and rebellion at a time when the world desperately needed all three. Their chemistry was infectious. Their style, edgy, bohemian, different, made them stand out. They weren't just singers, they were icons. With follow-up hits like Baby Don't Go and The Beat Goes On, they built a musical empire, touring the country and appearing on every major show. In the public eye, They were the embodiment of young love and fearless creativity. But behind the scenes, things were far more complex. While their careers soared, their relationship quietly cracked. Sunny, often described as controlling, took charge of the business, while Cher became the face, the voice, the glamour. She trusted him implicitly, even signing contracts she didn't fully understand. What she didn't realize then was that while she was creating art, Sunny was securing control. The financial and legal aspects of their partnership left Cher deeply vulnerable. Emotionally, things weren't easier. Their bond, once so sweet and sincere, became strained. Sunny's decisions and their growing personal differences pushed them apart. But because their brand, Sunny and Cher, was still in high demand, they kept the facade alive long after the love had faded. As Sunny once wrote in his diary, the act was what kept everything in place, and so they stayed together in the spotlight, even when they were no longer together in life. By 1974, it all came crashing down. Cher filed for divorce, and just like that, the fairy tale ended. But for Cher, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of one of the hardest yet most defining chapters of her life. She left the marriage with almost nothing. Sunny had controlled the finances, the contracts, the legal structure of their empire. She had given her heart, her voice, her youth, and walked away with a mountain of debt and a bruised sense of trust. It would have been easy to disappear, to let the heartbreak and humiliation consume her. But Cher didn't. Instead, she did what only the truly resilient can do. She started over. Her first move? Reclaiming her voice. In 1975, she launched her own variety show simply titled Cher. Everyone said it would fail without Sunny. But it didn't. It thrived, and for the first time, audiences saw her not as one half of a duo, but as a powerhouse in her own right. Bold, hilarious, magnetic. But that was just television. Her music career, once unstoppable, was in free fall. Albums like Stars and I'd Rather Believe in You failed to chart. Critics dismissed her. Radio stations ignored her. The industry whispered, "She's done." After walking away from Sunny and the identity she had built beside him, Cher found herself standing at the edge of uncertainty. She was no longer part of a duo, no longer protected by someone else's decisions. She was on her own now, and the world wasn't sure if she could make it without him. The truth was, Cher had always been the voice, the charisma, the star. But behind the scenes, Sunny had handled the business. So when the curtain fell on their partnership, Cher was left not just heartbroken, but financially unstable. She had trusted the wrong contracts, signed away too much, and now faced a mountain of debt and fading fame. Still, she refused to disappear. She launched her own variety show, Cher, which became a surprise hit, proving she had the charisma to carry a stage alone. But television was just part of her fight for independence. Music, her first love, was still waiting for her comeback. Unfortunately, the road ahead was rough. Her first few solo albums after the split struggled to connect with listeners. Albums like Stars, 1975, I'd Rather Believe in You, 1976, and Cherished, 1977, barely made a dent on the charts. Critics dismissed them, calling her sound outdated. Radio turned elsewhere. And just like that, the woman who once ruled the airwaves was suddenly seen as irrelevant. It wasn't just disheartening, it was humiliating. But Cher didn't fold. She watched, listened, and learned. The late 1970s were exploding with disco, music that was bold, electric, unapologetically glamorous. It wasn't her natural style. She had always leaned more rock than rhythm, but survival meant reinvention. And reinvention? That was her specialty. In 1979, Cher signed with Casablanca Records, a label known for its disco dominance. She stepped into the studio with glitter, groove, and a daring new sound. The result was Take Me Home, an album unlike anything she'd ever done. With its thumping beat and sultry vocals, the title track, Take Me Home, became an unexpected hit. The song soared into the Billboard Top 10, and Cher, draped in gold and sequins on the album cover, had officially rebranded herself as a disco diva. It was bold, it was risky, and it worked. But beyond the music, the album was a statement, a declaration, that she was still here, that she wasn't just Sunny's ex, that she could evolve with the times and do it on her own terms. However, staying on top would prove just as difficult as getting there. Her follow-up disco album, Prisoner, 1979, while filled with ambition, failed to find its audience. Cher had wanted it to be more personal, more experimental, but the label pushed for dance floor hits. The creative tug-of-war left the project unbalanced, and it quietly slipped into obscurity. Still, Cher wasn't discouraged. If disco wasn't the long-term answer, she'd find the next one. Because for her, the struggle had never just been about music, it was about identity. About constantly asking herself, who am I now? Who do I want to become next? By the early 1980s, Cher had already proven that she could survive heartbreak, career slumps, and changing musical trends. But now, she was ready to do something even more daring, step completely out of her comfort zone and into an entirely different spotlight. She wasn't just reinventing her sound anymore, she was reinventing her voice. Acting had always fascinated Cher. It wasn't just about pretending, it was about expressing truth in a different way. And at a time when many in the music industry were beginning to doubt her longevity, Cher quietly began taking roles that would silence every doubter in the most powerful way possible. Her breakthrough came in 1983 with Silkwood, a film based on the real-life whistleblower Karen Silkwood. Acting alongside Meryl Streep and Kurt Russell, Cher played Dolly Pellicer, a working-class lesbian plant worker with no-nonsense grit and quiet vulnerability. And to everyone's surprise, Cher didn't just hold her own next to Hollywood legends. She shined. That performance earned her a Golden Globe Award and an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. For audiences and critics alike, it was a wake-up call. Cher wasn't just a singer, she was an actress of serious substance. And that was just the beginning. She went on to take bold, complex roles in films like Mask, 1985, where she portrayed the fiercely protective mother of a teenager with a facial deformity. The film was both critically acclaimed and deeply emotional. Her performance was raw and real, rooted not in glamour but in grit. Then came Suspect, 1987, where she played a public defender unraveling a dark mystery. Again, Cher brought unexpected depth and quiet fire to the screen, but nothing would compare to what came next. Later in 1987, Cher took on the role that would define her acting career, Loretta Castorini in the romantic comedy Moonstruck. It was a story about love, grief, second chances, and the beautiful messiness of life. Cher played Loretta, a widowed Italian-American bookkeeper who finds herself unexpectedly falling for her fiancé's passionate younger brother, played by Nicolas Cage. The character wasn't flashy or fantastical. She was real, vulnerable, funny, strong, and deeply human. Cher didn't just play Loretta, she became her. Her performance was charming, grounded, and emotionally layered. She brought humor and heartbreak together in a way that felt effortless. And when she delivered that iconic line, "Snap out of it," a star was reborn, not as a singer or a variety show host, but as a leading lady in the truest sense of the word. That year, Cher won the Academy Award for Best Actress, a moment that stunned Hollywood. Here was a woman the industry had once underestimated. A woman who had been told she was too flashy, too unconventional, too pop to be taken seriously. And yet, there she stood, Oscar in hand, tears in her eyes, a symbol of resilience dressed in unapologetic elegance. But what many didn't know was just how hard she had worked for that moment. Cher took acting seriously. She studied scripts with intensity, leaned into her vulnerabilities, and surrounded herself with directors who believed in her talent, not just her name. She once said that acting wasn't about being someone else. It was about telling the truth through someone else's eyes. And that's exactly what she did. At the peak of her acting career, with an Oscar in hand and a new sense of artistic purpose, Cher was glowing in the public eye. To the world, she looked unstoppable. But behind the dazzling lights and red carpets, her body was sending a different message, one that couldn't be ignored. It started with small signs: fatigue, low energy, a heaviness she couldn't shake. At first, Cher thought it was just stress or exhaustion. After all, she had been pushing herself for years, jumping from one project to the next without pause. But as the symptoms grew more intense, the truth became clear. This was something deeper. She was diagnosed with Epstein-Barr virus, a chronic and exhausting illness that attacks the immune system and leaves its victims drained in a way that even sleep can't fix. Soon after, it developed into pneumonia, a serious complication that forced her to do something she almost never did: stop. For nearly 2 years, Cher had to step away from the stage, the set, and the spotlight. And, for a woman who had spent her life fighting to be seen and heard, the silence was devastating. She later admitted in an interview with the New York Times that this time was one of the hardest in her life, not just physically, but emotionally. She said, "I was really upset about it, and who could blame her?" She had worked so hard to rebuild her career, only to watch everything pause at the very moment she felt most alive. But perhaps what made it even more painful was the quiet nature of it all. This wasn't a dramatic fall from grace or a public scandal. It was a quiet kind of suffering, a private battle, a war waged in hospital rooms and behind closed doors, while the world continued spinning without her. For someone like Cher, who had always relied on motion, energy, and reinvention, being still felt like a loss of identity. She wasn't just fighting illness. She was fighting irrelevance, the fear that by the time she got better, the world might have already moved on. And yet, she didn't let that fear win. During her recovery, she focused on healing her body, but also her mind and spirit. She began to reflect on the journey so far, the victories, the heartbreaks, the people she had loved and lost. She learned to embrace rest not as a failure, but as a necessity, a reset. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to return. It wasn't a sudden comeback. There was no grand re-entrance. But when Cher did step back into the public eye, she did it with more clarity, more purpose, and more depth than ever before. Her voice, once paused, sounded richer. Her presence, once withheld, felt wiser. And her fans welcomed her back not with questions, but with open arms, because they had missed her. And more importantly, they understood her. This chapter in Cher's life may not have been filled with applause or awards, but in many ways it revealed her greatest strength, the ability to endure, even in silence. Because strength isn't always about charging forward. Sometimes it's about pausing, listening to your body, honoring your limits, and still believing in the comeback. And as Cher slowly returned to work, she began to see the world, and herself, with new eyes. She had survived the chaos of childhood, the collapse of love, the fall of her music career, and now the fragility of her own health. Behind every dazzling costume, behind every chart-topping hit and red carpet moment, Cher has always carried one identity far more quietly, but just as profoundly as any other: mother. To the public, she was a force. But in private, she was navigating the complex, often painful terrain of raising two children while living in a world that rarely allowed her to slow down. Fame, by its nature, demands everything: time, energy, presence. And for Cher, motherhood was a journey filled with both deep love and deep contradictions. Her first child, Chastity Bono, was born in 1969 during her marriage to Sonny. From the start, the child was raised under a spotlight no child asked for, appearing even on their parents' variety show. But years later, that child, now grown, would begin a courageous and deeply personal journey that would test Cher in ways she never anticipated. In the late 2000s, Chastity came out as transgender and began transitioning to live as Chaz Bono. For Cher, a longtime LGBTQ+ icon and outspoken ally, the news was met not with rejection, but with a wave of complex human emotion. In candid interviews, Cher admitted the truth many parents hesitate to say out loud. It wasn't easy at first. She struggled, not with love, but with understanding. She had to grieve the daughter she thought she knew, while learning to embrace the son who was bravely stepping forward in truth. "I did not go through it that easily," Cher shared honestly in an interview with Pride Source. She worried, she questioned, she feared the unknown. But through it all, one thing never wavered: her love, and that love eventually grew louder than her fear. Cher became not only an advocate for her son, but a powerful voice for the trans community. She listened, she learned, and she chose connection over confusion. Today, she speaks about Chaz with fierce pride. "Chaz is so happy now," she once said, "and we get along better than ever." Their story is not just about identity, it's about growth, about how even the strongest mothers must sometimes relearn what it means to support their child, and about how love, when truly unconditional, has the power to evolve. But Cher's journey as a mother didn't stop there. Her second child, Elijah Blue Allman, born from her brief marriage to musician Greg Allman, walked a very different path. Sensitive, artistic, and fiercely independent, Elijah often felt like he was searching for his place. not just in the shadow of his famous parents, but within the structure of a family shaped by distance. At just 7 years old, Elijah was sent to boarding school. For a child, that decision felt like abandonment. When you go to boarding school at 7, it's kind of hard to feel like you're not being shunned, he shared in a deeply honest interview. Though he now speaks with maturity and grace about that time, the wounds, he admitted, never fully disappeared. Years later, in 2013, there was hope for healing. Elijah and his wife moved in with Cher briefly, attempting to bridge the years of emotional distance. But, as is often the case with family, especially when fame and old scars are involved, things grew complicated. A disagreement, never made public, led to another silence between them. Yet despite the tension, Elijah has never spoken with bitterness. She's really talented, she's gorgeous. I mean, she's Cher. What's not to love? He said with quiet sincerity. Their relationship, he described, is a work in progress. Not perfect, not easy, but still full of love. These moments reveal a side of Cher the world doesn't often see. The mother who tried, who sometimes failed, who kept going anyway. A woman who had to balance spotlights with bedtime stories, world tours with personal phone calls, and often found herself falling short like any human would. And yet, through every challenge, she never stopped being there, in the way she knew how. Motherhood, for Cher, was never about perfection. It was about presence, however flawed. About listening, growing, and showing up when it mattered most, even if that meant showing up years later, with new eyes and a softer heart. Her journey with Chaz and Elijah reminds us all that even the strongest families carry cracks. But within those cracks is where the light gets in. It's where truth lives. It's where healing begins. And as Cher stood beside her son Chaz, celebrating his truth, and kept the door open for Elijah, waiting for the day he might walk through it again, she proved something truly powerful. That love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. It just has to endure. And endure, it has. Now, as Cher steps gracefully into her late 70s, a new reflection begins. One not focused on hits or headlines, but on legacy. A legacy not just of reinvention, but of quiet resilience. And soon, we'll look at how she came to be not only an entertainment icon, but a symbol of strength for generations. When we talk about icons, the word can feel overused, thrown around to describe fame or trendiness. But when we talk about Cher, the word fits like a glove stitched from decades of fearlessness, reinvention, and resilience. Her name isn't just a brand. It's a symbol of what it means to be original, to endure, and to lead without asking permission. Cher's legacy is not defined by one era. It stretches across 6 decades, like a golden thread weaving through music, film, fashion, and social change. Few artists have reinvented themselves so boldly, so often, and so unapologetically, and in doing so, redefined what it means to be a woman in entertainment. Let's start with the music. From the folk pop harmonies of I Got You Babe, to the glittering disco of Take Me Home, to the dark synth-driven dance floor anthem Believe. Cher has always been ahead of the curve. That 1998 hit not only revived her career yet again, but introduced the world to the use of auto-tune as a deliberate vocal effect. Today, that technique is everywhere. But Cher did it first. And, at age 52, she also proved something radical, that a woman could still top the charts in her 50s, not because of nostalgia, but because of innovation. And then there's fashion. Cher didn't just wear clothes, she challenged convention with them. Her daring, often theatrical style, most famously crafted with designer Bob Mackie, pushed boundaries long before red carpet risk became a buzzword. Beaded bodysuits, towering headpieces, bare midriffs in an era of conservatism. Cher turned the stage into a runway and made sure no one forgot that boldness was beautiful. She made it okay to be different. For generations of artists, from Madonna to Lady Gaga to Beyoncé, Cher has been the blueprint. The one who proved that you could be glamorous and strong. That you could be sexy and smart. That you could reinvent yourself, not as a gimmick, but as a reflection of growth. But perhaps her most enduring influence comes from how she has used her voice beyond the microphone. Cher has been a powerful and consistent ally to the LGBTQ+ community long before it was publicly embraced by most celebrities. Her advocacy isn't just performative, it's personal. It's rooted in her deep love for her son Chaz, and in her understanding that identity, like art, deserves freedom and respect. She has marched, she has spoken, She has given her platform to those who didn't have one. And in doing so, she's helped countless people feel seen. People who once felt invisible, including drag performers, queer youth, and trans individuals seeking understanding in a world that too often denies it. She's also opened doors for women in the industry. At a time when female artists were often dismissed after a certain age, Cher refused to fade. She proved that women don't have an expiration date in entertainment or in life. Her success in her 40s, 50s, and beyond is a living testament to that truth. But here's the thing about Cher's legacy. It isn't just about what she did. It's about what she represents. She's the girl who wore rubber bands to hold her shoes together, who became the woman with a star on every stage she touched. She's the teenager who felt like an outsider in class who grew into the voice of millions. She's the woman who lost love, lost health, lost footing, and came back every single time fiercer than before. And so, as we close this extraordinary journey through the life of Cher, a woman who defied the odds, shattered expectations, and turned pain into power, we're reminded that true icons aren't just born, they are forged. Through struggle, reinvention, and unshakable spirit. Cher has shown us what it means to keep standing when the world says sit down, to keep singing when your voice feels broken, and to keep loving, even when the road gets lonely. If her story moved you, if it inspired you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be, then we invite you to become part of our community. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, love, and the human spirit. Sparkles, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. What does Cher mean to you? Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay bold, stay true, and never stop believing in your voice.